I'm a novelist. I'm also a killer. To satisfy my vanity and to provide inspiration to my fellow writers, I've decided to write down everything I've done. Of course, I know what to write and what not to write. Readers, rest assured, I'm confident they'll never find evidence to convict me. Many believe I murdered Emily Chun out of intense hatred. That's a misunderstanding. I loved Emily enough to give my life for her. 5 years ago, I used my hard-earned savings to rent a piece of land at the foot of Mount Song and opened a chicken farm. Emily was the daughter of my landlord, Peter Chun. She had a lovely round face and skin as porcelain white and delicate. The moment I laid eyes on her, I fell for her. After my invitation, fresh out of college and unemployed, Emily gladly agreed to help at the farm. As we spent more time together, it was only natural that we became a couple. I was crazy in love with her. During our relationship, I indulged her with designer bags, luxury perfumes, and even a car. Anything she wanted, I made an effort to provide. Every time I saw her sweet smile, I felt all my sacrifices were worth it. Those were happy times. Unfortunately, that damn third party appeared, Ryan Cole, a smooth-talking pretty boy who worked as a chef at a 5-star hotel in the city. He started visiting the farm frequently under the guise of purchasing supplies. Before long, he and Emily began an affair. He deceived her, claiming he made a fortune through stock investments and intended to open a restaurant in the provincial capital. He promised her a lavish lifestyle, complete with a villa and luxury cars, thanks to his charm and culinary skills. Emily was drawn in by his promises and, after just a week, left without a word to follow him to the city. Her departure hurt me deeply, and I drowned in despair, unable to escape my pain. It took me 6 months to rise from the shadow of heartbreak. By then, I swore I never wanted to see Emily again. But a year later, she reappeared in my life. That night, I committed my first murder. I was sitting on the couch, scrolling through TikTok when I heard a rapid knock at the door. I opened it to find Emily standing there with a tattered suitcase, looking dejected. Though I hesitated, her pitiful expression softened my heart, and I invited her in. Crying on the soft couch, she revealed the torment she had endured. After marrying Ryan, his true nature emerged quickly. He was broke, having stolen money even for their wedding. He spent his days drinking and gambling. Emily was too scared to speak up, fearing his violence. Pointing to the bruises on her face, she tried to win my sympathy, as if I would still care for her. She believed that since I once loved her, I would certainly forgive her if she came back. But she was dead wrong. The pain she'd caused me had changed me into a different person. She asked for $200,000, saying she wanted to help Ryan start a restaurant, firmly believing employment would reform him. Her incessant chatter only fueled my rage. I wanted nothing more than to strangle her. In the end, I did just that. It was my first murder, and honestly, it was far easier than I had imagined. I sneaked up behind her, pretending to offer a massage, my hands slowly reaching around her neck. She kept talking, oblivious to the danger. Taking a deep breath, I suddenly tightened my grip around her throat. Her face flushed red. Her eyes widened in fear and disbelief. She flailed her arms and kicked her legs, but her struggles were futile. As time passed, her resistance weakened, and her body went limp. The room fell silent, except for my heavy breathing echoing through the space. I reached out to check for her pulse, confirming she was gone, then began the process of disposing of her body. I spent the entire night making her disappear from this world. After finishing everything, I reclined on the couch, savoring what had just transpired, feeling like a brilliant artist. Killing Emily was the most exquisite work of my life. The next morning, after ensuring I had left no trace, I went about my usual chores at the farm. About a week later, a police car shattered my peaceful life. Officer Lee pushed open the half-closed iron gate, his sharp gaze sweeping the yard, followed by a young, attractive female officer. "Hello, do you know Emily Chun?" "Someone reported her missing," Officer Lee said, showing his badge with a steady, authoritative voice. "Emily? She was my ex-girlfriend. She came to see me a week ago, saying she couldn't stand her husband's abuse and wanted me to take her in. I clearly refused, and she left in tears. I knew that lying could raise suspicion, so I revealed some truthful information. Emily's husband had reported her missing. If Emily was here, why didn't you come to the police station to inform us?" Officer Lee questioned sternly. "Officer, I had no idea her husband had called you. Even if I did, I wouldn't tell you. She left because she was being abused. Why would I send you to get her back into his clutches? I responded quickly and excitedly. My answer was flawless, leaving Officer Lee momentarily at a loss for words. Then I volunteered that Emily had left in such a hurry. She hadn't even taken her suitcase. Upon hearing that, Officer Lee asked to check the suitcase. I quickly retrieved it for him to inspect. He crouched down, carefully rummaging through the items inside. The suitcase contained neatly folded women's clothing, faintly scented with lavender. A light blue dress fell gently, swaying slightly as Officer Lee moved. That dress was what I had taken off Emily that night. Don't worry, I wore gloves while doing it, so there were no fingerprints left on the clothing. We saw Emily entering the chicken farm on the village surveillance cameras wearing this dress. Why is it in the suitcase? Officer Lee pointed at the bag and asked. I thought for a moment before shaking my head and replied, I didn't pay attention to what she was wearing that night. I sensed that Officer Lee was testing me. The chicken farm is located in a remote bi-ethnic village at the foot of Mount Song. To save costs, the village committee installed only a few cameras at the entrance, which were recently destroyed by local kids using slingshots and haven't been repaired since. It seems that Officer Lee has no substantial evidence against me after all. As expected, Officer Lee was skeptical of my statements but didn't press further. The young female officer asked me some less important questions, and I answered honestly. They eventually took Emily's suitcase back to the police station. In the following days, Officer Lee and the young officer came by every day for various reasons, significantly disrupting my life. Although they were suspicious of me, I remained calm and gracious. I told Officer Lee, I also feel sorry for Emily's disappearance. If there's anything I can do to help, please don't hesitate to ask. After all, cooperating is the duty of a law-abiding citizen. Officer Lee took me up on my offer and wanted to inspect the chicken farm. So, I showed them around my living quarters, a nicely decorated two-story villa. When we entered the villa, Officer Lee requested to see the kitchen. In the kitchen, there was a concrete water reservoir, which Officer Lee's gaze lingered on. I quickly explained, the water pipe leads to a lake on the farm. Rainwater flows into the lake, and when it exceeds a certain level, it flows through the pipe into the reservoir for daily use by the chicken coops. After leaving the kitchen, I took them to the firewood room, which was low and dim. As soon as the door opened, the young female officer jumped onto the pile of firewood, searching carefully, but clearly found nothing of value. Next, we headed to the chicken coop. The coop was built on lush green grass, surrounded by sturdy wooden fences, allowing the chickens to move freely. When it rains, I herd them inside, and when the weather is good, I let them back out. As we approached the fence, several gorgeous hens were pecking at the grass seeds and insects on the ground. I introduced them, saying, these chickens are raised under the blue sky and white clouds, fed with natural seeds and drinking spring water from the mountains. This environment makes their meat very tender, attracting many customers from across the country each year. After visiting the chicken coop, we went to my tool shed, built from colored steel tiles, stocked with various farming tools. Officer Lee's attention was drawn to stacks of burlap sacks piled in front of him. He asked what was inside. I told him, that's chicken feed. I regularly buy corn and wheat from villagers, then mix them to feed the chickens. While listening to my explanation, the young female officer measured the size of the sacks and began jotting down notes. Finally, I led them to the pasture, a vast area of grass where dozens of cows grazed leisurely, and a few lambs frolicked nearby. A gentle breeze swept over, causing the grass to sway and bringing a fresh fragrance. The lake nestled by the edge of the pasture looked like a jade jewel, serene and beautiful. However, Officer Lee and the young officer seemed uninterested in the scenery and soon left after a brief conversation. As I watched them walk away, a sense of tension in my chest eased slightly. But this relief didn't last long. Soon after, the police pulled a nameless female corpse from the artificial lake next to the pasture. The discovery of this unnamed body plunged me into a perilous situation. This all transpired after Officer Lee and the young officer left. That evening, after finishing a day of work, I was sitting at the dining table eating dinner when I suddenly heard urgent knocking at the door. I quickly got up to answer it. When I opened the door, I was shocked to see Emily's father, Peter Chun, looking disheveled with a scruffy beard. His haggard appearance was a stark contrast to the well-dressed man I once knew, showing just how much Emily's disappearance had affected him. Can I come in and sit for a moment? Peter's voice was hoarse and heavy. Of course. I shrugged and gestured for him to enter. "I'm here because I need to ask you for a favor." Peter sat down on the sofa, rubbing his face with his hands. His request puzzled me. I didn't know Peter well. Aside from paying rent, we hadn't seen each other in years. With Emily recently missing, his visit during such a sensitive time made me wary of his intentions. "Sir, feel free to ask if you need anything," I said, pouring him a cup of hot water. Peter took the cup and sighed deeply. "I just came from the police station. I learned some details about Emily's disappearance. According to their current evidence, after leaving the chicken farm to escape her abusive husband, she may have hidden in Mount Song. I'm here to ask you to help me search the mountain." "Sir, you can ask the police for this. Mount Song is vast. It would be like searching for a needle in a haystack if it's just the two of us." I waved my hand to indicate my refusal. I had told the police something similar, and they urged me to wait, assuring me that Emily would likely return on her own, just like before. "You've lived here a long time and know the area well. If you help me, we can discuss the rent situation." Peter took a sip of his water. After a moment of silence, I nodded in agreement. Money drives people, and birds die for food. The annual rent for the chicken farm was quite substantial, and if Peter could offer a reduction, it was a fortunate opportunity for me. The next morning, I arranged everything at the chicken farm and drove with Peter to Mount Song. After a few minutes on the bumpy dirt road, we arrived at the foot of the mountain. We parked the car safely and set off on foot with backpacks filled with food and water. I proceeded cautiously, always following behind Peter, keenly observing his reactions. After all, you never know how someone might react to their daughter's disappearance. After walking for a while, we spotted a wooden cabin in a clearing. This cabin was built by the village's forest protection team and served as a temporary resting place for villagers when the team was away. "Maybe Emily is hiding in there." A rare smile appeared on Peter's face as he hurried forward and gently pushed the door open. I followed closely behind him. As the door opened, a musty odor wafted out. I surveyed the room and noticed it was covered in dust, with no signs that anyone had been there recently. "It looks like she's not here," Peter sighed, and the smile quickly faded from his face. "I believe good people are always looked after. Emily will be fine," I said, sweeping the dust off the ground and setting down my backpack, telling Peter this cabin would be our shelter for the time being. "Emily is a timid girl. If she did go into the mountains, she wouldn't have run far. We should search outward from this cabin as our base. If she's still alive, we should be able to find her." After a simple meal, we set out on our search, carrying supplies and water bottles. We followed the winding path, scanning every nook and cranny for clues. Peter moved like a nimble rabbit, darting through the grass and trees, trying to catch any sign of Emily. However, as time passed, except for the occasional birdsong and the rustling of leaves in the wind, we found nothing. The next few days were no different. We walked long distances and endured hardships, yet there were no valuable discoveries. Gradually, Peter's mood grew increasingly despondent. In the evenings, he often sat on the ground, staring blankly ahead for long periods. I began to worry about his mental state. One morning, as we were eating in the cabin, I glanced at our dwindling supplies and subtly reminded Peter that it might be time to head back. At my suggestion, he shook his head and shot me a sardonic smile. "I actually think the same as you, but the way we return might be a little different from how we came." "What do you mean by that?" I sensed an unusual tone in Peter's words and stepped back cautiously in case of any sudden attack. "Relax. You'll soon understand what I mean." Just then, the door to the cabin was flung open, and several figures rushed in, led by my old acquaintance, Officer Lee. He strode directly toward me, coldly stating, "You are suspected of being involved in Emily's disappearance. Please cooperate with our investigation." Officer Lee's words were ice-cold and resolute as he pulled out a shiny pair of handcuffs from his waistband and skillfully snapped them onto my wrists. I was stunned and attempted to struggle, but found myself firmly restrained by two officers. The world around me momentarily froze, and a chill ran from my feet to the top of my head, blurring and twisting my surroundings. I was half dragged, half pushed out of the cabin, made to walk down the mountain toward a police car flashing its lights. On the way down, I overheard the officer's conversation and realized that Peter had lured me up the mountain as part of a trap he devised with Officer Lee. It was a diversion tactic. While I was away, the police had thoroughly searched my chicken farm and found evidence sufficient to convict me. Readers might be worried, thinking I would easily fall into their hands like this. Let me assure you that is impossible. Now that events have unfolded this way, everything is under my control. After playing along for so long, I'm tired. It's time for my counterattack. In the dimly lit interrogation room, the atmosphere was stifling. During the days you were gone, we searched the chicken farm thoroughly. The effort paid off. We recovered a female corpse from the lake next to the coop. Forensic examination confirms that this body is indeed the long-missing Emily. Now that we have conclusive evidence, I advise you to confess, Officer Lee said, confidently sitting across from me. Officer Lee, I don't know what you're talking about. You illegally entered my residence without any evidence, and you'll be held accountable for that. I leaned back in the interrogation chair and rubbed my sore neck. You want evidence, do you? Take a look at this. Officer Lee pulled out a stack of documents from his pocket and threw them onto the table in front of me. On top of the documents was a photograph. I picked it up and saw a highly decomposed body. Although the face was unrecognizable, the outline of the body did resemble Emily somewhat. According to the forensic examination, the victim died from blunt force trauma to the back of the head. Subsequently, the killer bound her with stones and sank her to the bottom of the lake, and those stones originate from your chicken coop storage. We found a significant amount of Emily's DNA at the chicken farm and in your bedroom. The young female officer chimed in. Seeing her somewhat amateurish acting, I couldn't help but chuckle to myself. I knew they were trying to scare me, attempting to break down my mental defenses so I would confess. Officer Lee, you have repeatedly suspected and deceived me. As a law-abiding citizen, my patience is limited. I pretended to be angry, slamming my hand down hard on the table. We didn't deceive you. This body was indeed pulled from the lake at the chicken farm, Officer Lee replied, shrugging. But she is not Emily. She belongs to someone else. I cast a sideways glance at Officer Lee and noticed the doubt and confusion on his face. So you know who the deceased is? He questioned leisurely. Of course I do. She is Emily's mother, Linda Carter, I replied coldly. Then, in front of the police, I began to recount a murder I witnessed a month ago. After Emily left, I fell into a prolonged depression. During that time, I couldn't sleep at night. To pass the time, I developed a strange habit. Whenever it was quiet at night, I liked to lie on the grass by the lake and gaze up at the star-studded sky. The stars sparkled with a cold, gentle light. Beneath this starlight, I felt an unprecedented tranquility and peace, and the pain of longing seemed somewhat bearable. This continued for a long time. One ordinary night, as I lay on the grass, I suddenly noticed a faint light shining from the window of Emily's house, slicing through the surrounding darkness. Curiously, I looked up and saw Emily's mother, Linda Carter, standing inside with a large, muscular young man, wrapped tightly in each other's arms, their lips intertwining passionately. Startled, I quickly pulled out my phone and pointed the camera at the window, which emanated warm yellow light. Inside the room, Linda's face was flushed with excitement, her eyes closed, lost in ultimate pleasure. I held my breath, gently pressed the recording button, and saved that inappropriate footage. Later, out of spite toward Emily, I sent that video to her phone using an anonymous number. I knew Emily's character. She was intolerant of betrayal. Upon discovering this, she would undoubtedly tell her father, Peter Chun, immediately. By then, I would be able to enjoy a good show. Everything unfolded just as I had anticipated. 2 nights later, when Peter drove home, I stealthily climbed over the low fence, hiding in his yard. After hearing a heated argument from the living room, I crept to the window, ready to witness the drama unfold. What I saw was an amusing scene. Peter's face was ashen, his eyes blazing like fire as he glared at Linda. The video I had sent was still playing on the screen of Peter's phone. You think after all the hard work I've done to give you a good life, this is how you repay me? Peter Chun yelled as he threw his phone at Linda Carter. Yes, I've fallen in love with someone else. So what? You're always busy working. Apart from giving me money, what else do you provide? I'm done with this boring life. Let's get a divorce. Linda replied without a hint of remorse. She met Peter's accusations with a calm demeanor, completely unashamed. Her nonchalant attitude infuriated him further. At that time, Peter had already submitted his application for a tenured position as an associate professor. If the scandal of his wife's infidelity and their impending divorce got out, it would severely damage his reputation and career. In a fit of rage, Peter lost control. He grabbed a beautiful sculpture that symbolized their love and swung it at Linda's head. There was a dull thud, and the sharp edge of the sculpture left a deep gash on Linda's skull. Blood gushed out, staining her clothes and splattering all over Peter's face. Linda collapsed, her eyes wide with shock and disbelief, then fell still like a broken doll. The air was filled with the heavy scent of blood. What unfolded before me surpassed all my expectations. I had considered many ways Peter might handle the situation, but I never imagined he would resort to murder. Yet, as the metallic scent of blood hit my nostrils, I was surprised to find that instead of fear, I felt an inexplicable thrill. I was like a vampire drawn to the scent of blood, every cell in me intoxicated with pleasure. This rush of blood awakened a hidden demon within me, setting the stage for my later descent into darkness. Watching Linda lie motionless in a pool of blood, Peter was breathing heavily, trembling uncontrollably. But he had a strong psychological composure. He quickly regained his calm. Once he collected himself, he awkwardly carried Linda's lifeless body out of the house, ensuring no one was around before he climbed over the fence with her. When he reached the lake at the chicken farm, he found a large rock near the coop, tied it to Linda's body, and pushed her deep into the water. After disposing of the body, Peter returned home and meticulously cleaned the murder scene, even leaving behind traces for Linda's lover to find. Once he had everything in order, he acted like nothing happened, humming a tune as he drove back to the city. Peter was quite clever. He knew that with his status and reputation, the police wouldn't suspect him without solid evidence. His judgment turned out to be correct. When questioned by the police, he easily redirected the murder suspicion toward Linda's lover. That's the story I told the police to make myself look more innocent. I crafted my image as a pure bystander caught up in a love affair gone wrong, while Peter became the cold-blooded monster who murdered his wife and framed another. After hearing my account, none of the officers believed me. But when I pulled out my phone and played the video of Peter killing Linda, the room fell silent. I hadn't intended to release that video. Peter had just been promoted to professor, and I thought I could use the video to blackmail him for an easy life. But he was too arrogant, trying to pin the murder on me in the case of his missing daughter. Since he was so ruthless, I couldn't be blamed for being unkind. At the moment the video surfaced, his bright future came to an abrupt end. Based on the information I provided, the police quickly arrested Peter, and I was detained for failing to report a crime. This was all part of my plan. I needed to do this to completely clear my name. While I was held, Officer Lee returned to the chicken farm. I later heard from friends that over 30 officers were conducting extensive searches there every day. They searched every nook and cranny, inside, outside, on the roof, and in the grass, even going through the chicken feed. They knocked on walls looking for hidden rooms and used shovels to dig up every possible burial site. They even rented a powerful pump to drain the water from the kitchen reservoir and the lake. When the water was gone, a swarm of police officers, like fishermen, rolled up their pants and waded through the muddy lake looking for any clues. They even sent in a petite female officer to check my cook stove for burnt bone fragments and took away a large amount of ash and soil for analysis. They investigated the drains to see if I had dissolved a body in acid. But despite all their efforts, they found nothing. Only then did Officer Lee and the others truly believe in my innocence. On the day I was released from the detention center, Officer Lee came to visit with an apology gift. It was a lovely fruit basket filled with the season's freshest fruits. He looked a bit embarrassed, assuring me he would send someone to restore my messy chicken farm. I graciously told him that their actions were part of their duty. As long as they could solve the case quickly, I didn't mind suffering a little. After that, we moved into the living room, gathered around the sofa, and chatted amiably. The last rays of sunlight poured through the window, lighting up our faces with warmth. Officer Lee accepted my invitation to stay for dinner. I personally cooked, skillfully preparing chickens I had caught from the coop. The flames danced on the stove, hot oil bubbled in the pan, and the aroma of spices and chicken filled the air, making it mouth-watering. The dining table was softly lit, with dishes beautifully arranged. As we sipped wine and chatted, Officer Lee soon became quite tipsy. With my help, he shakily got into a cab to go home. After Officer Lee left, I returned to my study and quickly typed out everything I just described. After all this rambling, my dear readers must be getting impatient, I said. Now, let's get back to the main event, the mystery of Emily Chen's missing body. That night, after killing Emily, I took her body to the industrial shredder in the warehouse. As a fan of detective novels, I had seen many methods of disposing of bodies using shredders in books and on TV. I had previously experimented with the remains of dead horses and cows. Compared to those animals, Emily's body was much smaller and easier to handle. However, to avoid leaving traces, I carefully ground her teeth and bones until they were reduced to powder. Once I processed the body with the shredder, I thoroughly cleaned the remnants using soap and water. Then, I followed up by shredding corn and wheat to ensure no trace of Emily's cells would remain in the machine. I mixed her bone and flesh powder with the grain powder to create a nutritious feed. The hungry chickens in the coop devoured the mixture in just one day. At this point, even if the police suspected me, there was nothing they could do. The chickens that had consumed the feed had already made their way into the stomachs of customers across the country. As for whether the chicken Officer Lee just ate contained any of Emily's bone powder, I couldn't say for sure. If it did, I thought it would certainly be an interesting twist for Officer Lee. And just like that, this story is coming to an end. I want to remind everyone that I'm a novelist. While writing this tale, I've mixed in elements of truth and fiction to make it more engaging. It's up to you to decide what's real and what's not. This case is merely the first murder I've committed in my life, releasing the hidden demon within me. If you're interested, when the time is right, I'll bring more intriguing cases to you. As for who the next victim might be, looking at the comments section, I think I already have a target.